Okay, so given our theme of initiation, I thought that maybe we could have a bit of a discussion on the Christ, given, this is the central figure in the entire process of what we're discussing here. And there's so much mystery surrounding the phenomena of the Christ. And of course, we're all conditioned by the religious traditions that we've been involved in. Now, from my point of view, and no doubt yours too, it'd be preferable if he was here himself to speak for himself. And Uranus Sun, he could possibly show up. And if he did, I'd ask you all to be on your best behaviour, notwithstanding some impersonator could arrive. We've had that before, I think. Yeah. So I've spent some time recently really kind of delving into that period of time of his overshadowing in the 2000 entering into the Piscean era. And considering the nature of the initiations that he was passing through. And it's a fascinating story, as we know, but it's told through, the eyes and the words of the church fathers. And it's difficult for us as occultists to really get a grapple with the terminology and kind of adapt it in some way or make it relevant to a lot of the language that we become accustomed to through DK's writings. So I kind of focused on the central theme of his teachings, which we are to understand are the Beatitudes. And I don't know if you all are familiar with those. So I was brought up a Catholic, so I've had it since day one. I might have to. Sorry, I've had to borrow Philip's computer with us to mine won't plug in here. So I've been looking at that period of time and going through DK's material and trying to understand the nature of the process that was involved, and also that paralleling that, of course, was Jesus going through the process of the third and the fourth initiation. All right, and that the teaching was given out to really a variety of disciples, and I would assume probation is first, second, third, fourth, and fifth. Given his rising to the station of world teacher as the Bodhisattva and going through the process of that decision in terms of his path of earth service. So he was really grappling with some pivotal themes in terms of how he foresaw the future unfolding. All right? And then, of course, he's also having to adapt to the impact of the will of God in this process that he's undergoing. So we're given some insights into that in the Bible story, but in this instance I wanted to focus on this particular part of the teaching. Now, the other difficulty that I have in our work is that when we're looking at the planes, I just park something if I don't understand it, And so when I was looking at the variety of the planes, the Buddhic plane, we're given these word formulas. You're familiar with this? From Cosmic Fire? And it's easy to make sense of these ones where we live and dwell, but when we get into this higher area where we're aspiring to be, the difficulty starts, And when I hit the Atmic plane, I've struggled with the Buddhic plane in itself, but I've got for myself a little bit of understanding about the nature of what these entail. I can't say I've got it covered, not by any stretch, and we all have some intuitive insight somewhere in our lives, We feel this in some manner. The very fact that we're here in this room together is describing some of that, some impact that we've had to deal with in our lives, and some spiritual impact that's usually come from these particular planes. Now, when I get into this Atmic plane, though, this is a total enigma, all right? And it's described as the realm of the spiritual will. So when we're doing our alignments and we're trying to understand the nature of creation and how all this came about, to me there's two factors that we can address here. One is the materialization of the monad, the coming down into matter, and the other one is the rising back up, the ascending out. All right? Now when we talk about the spiritual will, what does that mean? As distinct from the other types of will that we're familiar with that. So, and my approach has been is to look at that what will be. All right? What is trying to be? What wills to be? All right? What wills to be? So there's no real definition from our point of view other that we can relate this to what we will to be. All right? But now we're addressing something quite different when we're talking about, let's take the example of a kingdom. All right? Here we have the externalization of the hierarchy and the reappearance of the Christ. This is what wills to be. And we're kind of on the threshold of the experience of all of this. All right? And each of us is an example of our own process of what wills to be. The fact that we exist on the one hand is part of that, but the fact that we're evolving and developing is another evidence, case in point, of the process of what is willing to be. All right? So I'm trying to get this thing out of the realms of Never Never Land and bring it back down where we can relate to, because we are in fact an example of the entire series of planes. All right? And if we're going to be effective in whatever we're doing in terms of an alignment, we need to have a link to this somewhere in our awareness of our understanding. And that will give it the potency, the occult potency that it deserves, And rather working just kind of willy-nilly with this thing, we're going to be more direct, Like in our meditation this morning with Michael, there was a lot spoken about what we're involved in here. So that's one aspect of the spiritual. The other aspect is the ascending. All right, so this is the prodigal son on the return journey. And once again, we're all an example of the return journey. Otherwise, we wouldn't be entering a spiritual path. So the call has gone out from beyond this plane, from the monad. The call has gone out, and in each of us in our own way, we're responding to that. So we're grappling with the will in these initiations that we're looking at. And we're trying to turn it to its proper use. All right? So on the one hand, we've got what wills to be, and then we are the example of the return journey being called back. Now, in the esoteric psychology, we have the example of the techniques of integration for the personality and the soul. And we've worked with those a lot. And then we have the fusion techniques, presented attributes and isolated unity and inclusive reason, all right? Those three factors. And then he goes on to talk about these techniques of duality, all right? But there's nothing really said about those. But this is where this relating takes place for the techniques of duality. Now, in some ways, this is beyond all of us to really comprehend and make full use of, but we have to formulate this in an intelligent understanding of the processes involved. In other words, to give credence to the work that we're doing. All right? And really we're kind of linking up the chain of consciousness when we start to do this. So we could say this is beyond me, but you can keep saying that, And sooner or later it just becomes important to have a look at these things. So we've got on the one hand this historical figure, the Christ, and he's given us these Beatitudes. And as you can see, Atmic plane, look at that pointer. Beatitude. And it relates to the sense of hearing. All right? So the call goes out. And we hear that in some way. We register that. So let's take a look at these Beatitudes for a moment. Are you all familiar with these? Yeah? Now, when I look at them, I think, what on earth? You know? I don't really get it. I never got it, you know, with this stuff. You know, like it was one of those do good to others stuff, you know? And it never really gelled with me. And I've had, just recently, I thought I need to relate this to what we're addressing here in terms of this subplane of the Atmic plane. And I've spent hours reading this stuff over and over and come up with a blank page. You know, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. You know? It sounds good, but I don't know what that means. It doesn't make sense in terms of a sentence to me that I could utilise in any way. It may be for you. I'm not sure. All right? So I thought, well, I don't know who really wrote that. Apparently the Christ did. And I thought, well, if I was to change that, that would be blasphemy really, wouldn't it? You know, if I was to tamper with that. I mean, I have some Catholic friends and that's what they tell me. Well, you're all going to commit blasphemy because I don't think this is accurate at all. I don't think that is really what he said. I think there was a far deeper message that was implied in all this. So I thought, well, what the heck, let's just have a crack at this and I'll bring this along. We can have a discussion about this. We can have some other input from others and see what we can come up with, all right? Just a second. So the Beatitudes, I mean, even the word, what does that really mean? Attitudes for being. And related to the first plane of the subplane of the Atmic plane, first subplane. Attitudes for being. All right? So it's an entirely different tone than some of the other teaching that we've been looking at. Attitudes for being. And these, in my opinion, are to be used as a technique related to the particular ray type as the initiate proceeds to merge his or her identity in that of the monad. All right? Now, we're all in the process of doing that, but at a different stage. All right? We're all heading into this area. And it doesn't hurt for us to conceptualize or have some insight, glimpse, and perception of what we're dealing with in some of this. Given this was the central teaching, I'm to understand that the Christ gave out in the Piscean era. All right? You've all seen the movie? At the time when he spoke on the Mount. And it's a beautiful thing. But it's got to have some relevance to our cult path. Otherwise we can't use it. You know, we'll discard the stuff. So I'm trying to find the significance here in terms of this, all right? So this is quite a simplistic attempt on my part to translate these, all right? So first up, when I see blessed, you know, someone who is full of grace, this sort of thing, you know. But when we're dealing with this kind of level of consciousness, we have, well, let's start before that, prior to that. One of our first goals as a human being is to find happiness, obviously. And then as a soul, we're familiar with the sense of joy, you know, when we're living our life's purpose. And in this instance, we're dealing with bliss. This is a whole different magnitude in this respect. And I think that's what's addressed here, okay? So what I want to say is blessed, well, in bliss, all right, for us as an occultist. In bliss live those, all right? Now, poor in spirit. What do you do with that? Yeah, exactly. And but somehow we have to have a look at this and find an interpretation that would fit with the experience of someone entering this realm. So to me, and I'm open to any input from anyone about this, but to me, poor in spirit is someone who's been humbled. All right? And what would be the cause of that humbling? You know, on the threshold of the atmic plane. And so far, in bliss live those who are humbled in the dawning realization of the purpose of God. All right? Could tinker with it a bit, maybe? Yeah? So, technique of duality, where the initiate now is attempting to merge his consciousness in that of the monad. And there's a particular posture that is required in this, related to array type. All right? Because we've got 8 of them here. It's close enough to the number 7 for me, you know, to say there's 7 here and another one. So I think this is array 1 formula for those undergoing the technique of duality. And the function here is, for the array 1 type, is impacting by the purpose of God. All right? So when we look at the archetypal nature of the life we're involved with, and that we are attempting to shape and make our lives in the light of that particular archetype. All right? Behind that archetype is the purpose for its existence. And in this instance, this is what's occurring here, is that the initiate is attempting, all right, to be absorbed into that purpose. So even when we're looking at the initiator himself, this is a very intimate, meditative procedure. You know, you're entering right into the heart and soul of God, you know. So this is what, in my mind, what he was speaking about when he addressed the those that were gathered on the Sermon on the Mount, you know. And in that group, and I'm not sure because I wasn't invited, but there would have been, to my mind, at the least 3rd degrees, 4th degrees, 5th degrees, but why not 1st and 2nd degree initiates? It seems in the Bible story that was the case. All right? Now each is going to take their own message from this. But if you were addressing someone on the threshold of the atmic plane, you know, you'd want to say something that was of relevance. All right? Now, so when I did this, I got this all mapped out in my mind and stuff, and I thought, this would be an interesting thing to chat about. And before I got on the plane, I kind of freaked out a bit. I thought, actually, I don't have anything that validifies anything that I'm saying here.
Yeah, it was there. Thank you. Yeah, I was there. I was his drinking buddy. So when someone was humbled sufficiently, then they were prepared to seek the kingdom of God. That seems like a logical interpretation of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you're saying about Ray 1 as well.
Yeah, I am saying that. I mean, but I'm saying more than that too. That in this instance, we've got to go through each of these, because once you go into some of the others, you see the relevance of this or the significance of this being different in its tone to some of the others. All right? So I'll slip down and we'll have a look at some of the others. But I had never read anything in DK's material about Beatitudes, and I had looked, but when I just get on the plane, I thought I've got to find something before I leave town. And I picked up externalization of the hierarchy, and the section there where he deals with the coming work of reconstruction. Just a little piece. It's the only piece I've ever found. So I thought that I'd read that out for our benefit. This is just after the war, all right? In that period, Christ's pronouncement will be embodied in certain stanzas of which those already given are a small part. Only he can use these words in their proper manner, connotation, and emphasis. Only an inadequate paraphrase of certain sentences found in that pronouncement can be given to humanity. And this paraphrase can be used only when the war is over and not before. Okay? So this is like the big significant time in our history here. And this is what's happening. This means that they can be employed only when both Germany and Japan are under complete control of the United Nations, through whom the hierarchy has been working. This will not imply the attainment of complete peace, but it will mean the end of all aggressive fighting and all organised resistance, leading to the period of relative tranquility. We haven't had that. But anyway, here you are. Standing in his own place, at a central point in Asia, remote from the throngs and the impact of humanity, Christ will bless the world at the exact moment of the full moon of June. He will then repeat the Buddha's last words or sermon, as well as the Beatitudes which he uttered when on earth, and which have been so inadequately and misleadingly translated. A translation based upon the memory of what he said, and not upon direct dictation. All right? So we're spared. We can do this, you know?
Mike, that poor in spirit thing, it reminds me that the consciousness is divested of many attachments. You've gotten rid of a lot of stuff. First ray method, out, 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 until all that's left is spirit itself, the essence. You're not holding on to stuff. Spirit is there. So you've gotten rid of the attachments that usually clutter up your space in consciousness, and you've really got spirit then. And then you have the kingdom of heaven, because it's not full of the clutter of lesser things.
Well, I think that's true. Of course it's true, you know, and I think you're describing the interpretation of this from the third and fourth degree.
Okay.
And I don't think he's limiting this to that. And hence, I think that, you know, because I've thought about all of that in relation to the rest of them as well, and of course it's true. But he was addressing fifth degree initiates.
Also.
In the Sermon on the Mount.
Really? Okay.
You know.
Wow. Okay.
Where were they? Somewhere else.
I don't know. But
Yeah.
he's speaking from the fifth plane.
Yeah.
And he's speaking as a master.
I think he was speaking from higher than the fifth plane, and he was giving the teaching on the atmic plane.
Okay.
Yeah.
The atmic plane, fifth plane, where was he speaking from? That's the question.
Yeah. Michael.
They should be able to just turn right on. Is there a problem?
No. Kissing. No. Yes.
Testing, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's on many levels. Myself, blessed are the poor in spirit, for me, represents all of humanity, and only just individualized humanity that has barely started evolving, and the various stages in between of the very rudimentary stages of the mutable cross.
Yeah.
But yet they will be guaranteed the kingdom of heaven ultimately, and all will be drawn unto me, as the Christ said.
Yeah.
And Sanakamara will wait till they all come home, as it said. So I think it relates to that level as well. At a very
of course,
basic level.
And of course, I'm not going to disagree with you, Phil, because we all can take that interpretation. The difficulty I have is that he's not saying poor in consciousness, is he? And he's saying poor in spirit. And there's some kind of measure occurring here, as the initiate looks into what's in front of him. And he will feel the weight of being poor in spirit then. Until then, he doesn't really know the quantity and the magnitude of what's in front. Yeah. That's what I'm suggesting. In terms of, we want to get a little deeper into some of these things. You know what I mean? Why not?
Absolutely.
All right. Alina?
I think another way to approach this is look at the last part and then back into it. Blessed are the, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So we start with what level are we speaking about that is the kingdom of heaven? So we start there. What is the kingdom of heaven? And blessed are they who are in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So, a lot of these words, as you just described and read from the externalization, are poor translations, and they're also, some of them were, when you look at the Aramaic, and then it went into Greek, and then it went into Coptic, and then back, and it just lost the original. So I think some of this has to be intuited, what is really being said here. But I think a huge clue is the last part, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And what's in heaven, and what would it be required for us to be in heaven if we're in spirit? Yeah,
because these are very evocative once you get into this thing, And we don't need to settle for, some lightweight thing about any of this, We need to really try and get a sense of the depth of what he was referring to. Given this was a life-changing event in the history of the planet, and he chose to speak about the last sermon of the Buddha and the Beatitudes. And that was that. So who would he be addressing in that full moon? The entire hierarchy will be assembled. So this is, of a significant magnitude that has really, in our very recent history, And so we can play with it a bit, So in the Bible story, the character there, the apostle that represents this to me would have been St. Peter. The cock crowed 3 times and he was in denial, and he was humbled, and he's the rock apparently in which the church was built. So he'll see obviously no lightweight. I think we have an initiate here of some standing, but it's the interpreting of the story that's at fault, not what occurred. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, here we go. All right? So there's a little bit, poor in spirit.
What does it take to get through the eye of the needle? What can you bring with you through the eye of the needle?
Yeah.
You got to leave all your treasures behind, in a way. Then you really have the spirit. Because, you can't take time and space and illusion and all that. You can't take it through the eye of the needle. And the kingdom of heaven isn't just the normal kingdom of heaven here. This is something much higher. Like when he was talking about seventh heaven and all those higher states, not just Summerlands and David Chan and all that, but something that's real heaven for the hierarchy too. The triadal life, I guess. Well, I mean,
and more.
And more. Yeah, and more. So you're onto something here.
Yeah. So we move on to the next one. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. us Catholics, you know, we thought, we're mourning all the time, you know.
Yeah.
So what is that, to mourn, you know? So to mourn. In bliss live those who mourn. Doesn't make any sense. But when we're in mourning, we're parted from someone we love. All right? To me, that's the crux of it all. A sense of being separated. And there's this lamenting and mourning that goes on. And I think Rumi's big on this theme, isn't he? You know? The whole lament of being separated from the Blessed One. And I'm kind of heading in this direction with this. In bliss those, and I don't know what to put here. I thought, I'll put this here and see what you say. Who identify with the sorrow and suffering of others as it is their own. You know, there's no separation.
If you're going to get through them, you're going to have to
Yep.
go. We won't have time for a lot.
And the alternative is regret, resentment. And so if someone was in bitterness and not mourning, their disposition in advancing on the path would be different.
Indeed, indeed. So in terms of what the initiate is confronting in this instance is, and let's assume like a fourth degree, the sense of separation from the source is in a state of mourning. All right? And needs to be made whole. So an example we have of this is Master Jesus as the initiate going through that process at that time. And I wonder about the ray associated with that. And you have to go through the lot and then come back again to get a sense and maybe even quantify that. But I was choosing the ray 4 in this instance, you know. It seems to epitomise the state of being of the ray 4 going through these kinds of dilemmas, you know. I'm going to go down a bit. Here you go. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. All right? So this is, to me, this is us. This is, in bliss live those who uncompromisingly seek the truth. You know? Hunger and thirst for righteousness, to seek the truth. And I think that an example that we could have of this would be Blavatsky. I think this is where she gave us the theosophical motto, there is no religion higher than truth. I think that this is her technique of duality that she was presenting in that work, all right? And we could look at some of the other subplanes to see how she was active and how that took place, all right? So, in bliss live those who uncompromisingly seek the truth, all right? So we're, you know, in this sense, part of all of that. This is part of our technique of duality. We don't have to be limited to it. But to give a comparison to that, let's go to the next one. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Now it's a very different tone. And I found that guy, what's his name, Pope Francis, he wrote a book on mercy. It was an interview. And this is his keynote. It's a fascinating insight into his conceptualization of the nature of mercy. I think he calls it the first name of God. Mercy is the first name of God. And here you go. I wrote it down. Mercy is the divine attitude that embraces. The divine attitude that embraces. It is God's self-forgiving that welcomes, that leans down to forgive. Mercy, all right? Now, when you look at this character, the Pope, he's kind of an embodiment of this particular beatitude. You know, that's the keynote of his work. He's using this technique of duality, you know, and hence the changes that we will see in the Catholic Church as a result of him utilizing that technique. So to me, this is no small thing, you know. So I'm not sure about the translation, but in bliss live those whose compassionate understandings knows no limit. I'm not so sure about the Ray connotations in this, but I was leaning towards a Ray 2 type. All right? Any comments? Sheldon? Not much more. 5 minutes.
Well, this is pretty much part of the New Age now, Jeff, but it just seems to me that we know that we basically receive what we give, right? It's a great circle. It's a karmic circle. So if we are merciful, we receive it even as we give it. It isn't just that somebody turns around and is merciful to us, but we give mercy, we give love, we give compassion, we give understanding. It pours through us, and the fact it's pouring through us means we have received it right now. It's happening right now, and that's why we might be on the edge of the kingdom as we do it.
True, yeah. Well, I suppose he's on the world stage, isn't he? He's having a significant influence here. I mean, as such that not even Catholics, people who are not Catholics, are taking notice now, you know. And so that does have quite an impact. But he is one of those merciful characters. He embodies this thing, doesn't he? You know. So we have to wind this up because we're limited with time. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. All right. Now, once again, it's a dilemma. We've got a language problem here, and we have to resolve these in some manner. But I considered the peacemakers in terms of dealing with the pairs of opposites, and the most significant ones we have is, of course, spirit and matter. All right. The highest and lowest meet in the Ray 7 formula. And so I wondered, in bliss live those that resolve the pairs of opposites, you know. They resolve spirit and matter. I could go on all day, but, you know, we have very little time. How much more time do we have? None.
Just do what you want to do for a while.
Okay.
The group will be happy to stay longer.
I don't... we missed one out. Blessed, here we go. This is difficult, isn't it? Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. All right? What on earth again, you know? So meek and mild, passive, ineffective. Yeah. But in terms of when we look at inherit the earth, you know, I figure we're dealing with the spiritual resources of the planet, you know? We can't just look at this in a purely material sense. And that how do you handle those, you know? Because you're really only a custodian. You can't grip anything too tightly. You're a transmitting agent, all right? So there's an attitude of being or a posture in the way that this is managed and handled. And I wondered about that. How would that be? And we have the examples in there. You know, you're surrounded by fishermen and tax collectors and all the rest of them. And these are people, I thought, well, they were all the characters that are beginning to come under this influence as a technique of duality. All right? And so an example of that could be in the Mahachohan. All right? In bliss live those that are sensitive and attuned to the higher giftways and serve to distribute these resources. All right? So, Ray 3 type. So we kind of got to, each time you look at this, you've got to make some sort of leap into, you know, some sort of left field thing where the concrete mind is not so active. You can't hold any of this too tightly, you know. Just kind of play with the stuff. And we've been given permission. They've made a mess of the translation. So we can dabble here. All right? So at the end of this is a commentary. Remember? Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. So at that time, you know, it was, the place was outnumbered with martyrs, you know, and who bore witness to the truth. Now, in the prelogue to this stuff, he's speaking about himself. Because of me, he says this, and this is his influence in terms of the entire spiritual realm is now causing a reorientation of values and like a major upheaval. So now the whole, you know, he's saying, blessed are you who are persecuted for righteous sake. And this is his call to us in terms of the service that needs to be applied in our daily life, you know, and there will be consequences. You know, this is the call to his hierarchy to externalize, all right, and they will face the consequences, all right. So we can't just limit it to one realm of consciousness, to one plane of being. He's speaking to an entire category and magnitude of consciousnesses here when we're looking at this. I'm going to wrap it up because we're out of time, but is there any comments or questions? Got a couple?
Can we have a copy of that?
Sure.
Another Catholic here, I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
In terms of the birth chart, I keep hearing references that make me think of the 12th house in terms of humbling and other images of captivation or just the humbled self.
Mm-hmm.
The 12th house has a relationship with that.
Okay, good. But not only, no. I mean, you can be humbled in any area of the chart. Where the ego is exaggerated, that can happen, but certainly there's an overwhelming that takes place in the 12th house, just the magnitude of what is there, isn't it, of what you will face. Okay, we're all done? Oh, sorry.
I was just going to comment. I was just, I think about our journey here and the work of relationship as we, move along this cosmos. Earth is a stop on the great concourse of cosmos, in which this perfecting of right relationship is taking place. And these seem like postures, stances, prescriptions, things to be completed before one can inherit the earth. And inherit the earth doesn't mean to own it. It means to have completed the work of the realm and then move on as an inheritance, as something that has been accomplished, but not something to as it were own, but to have completed in that work of right relationship.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, you're getting it.
Yes.
You're kind of you've got to project into this a bit, don't you? And wrestle with these things.
Yes, and one of the things is, I'm strong in a Kemetic Egyptian tradition, and Earth itself, humanity itself, is coming before the scales to have its heart weighed. What does it mean for all of us now to come before those scales, the planetary weighing of the heart? And so these Beatitudes would be spoken along with the laws of Ma'at as a measure of that. They really much speak to what one has accomplished in this work. Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. We have to wrap it up. You're welcome. Cheers.